Hey everybody, Ben here from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios, and I am back with a new series of advanced tips and tutorials. I have beginner tips for painters, intermediate tips for general artists, and these are going to be my tips for taking the intermediate steps further and really kind of build on your basic elements and principles of design to make a much greater piece. So today I want to talk about building a complex composition and sort of creating worlds. So as you can see here, I've got a drawing that's just about finished. I've got a few dark sections to add over here in the foreground, but for the most part it's pretty much done. Going to be finishing this up in the next hour or so. Now this particular drawing I've been working on for the past 6 or 7 hours, collectively of course, not all at once in one sitting. And you might be thinking, wow, this is a really great composition. And the idea with this composition was to create something that is sort of future factory, maybe a little bit in ruin, I'm not really sure. But I had a general idea before I even started, and to get ideas of what shapes I needed, I started to search DeviantArt for a few images. So every idea, whether I'm making a painting or just a general drawing, will start as something in my sketchbook. So about 2 weeks ago I was doing a few studies of individual pieces, and I did a little bit of a bridge here. And I like the idea of this vertical, horizontal look to this old mechanical bridge. So I did a little bit more, and I did a little research. I grabbed a few images from DeviantArt, threw them into Photoshop, took out the color, and then put them into Microsoft Word and just printed them out. One of the things that I came across was some of these sort of capsule type images, and I'm like, I like that, I want to try and use that in a piece somewhere. So I came up with this idea of a message in a bottle. So maybe one of these capsules contains something, something interesting, maybe why is it there? So I started thinking about the environment and why this environment would exist. So there's a little bit of a story to go along with these environments that kind of gets your mind working. And so I printed out a few more different concepts. So these images, just general searches for futuristic cities, factories, that kind of thing. Some of them I simplified down to a couple elements. And so I started pulling elements from both 4 of these pieces and 3 of these, and combining them into one composition. So I started playing around with different shapes and started mapping out a larger composition in my sketchbook. I took some of the vertical, very sort of silhouette foreground images from the first image and put those right into there. I like that idea as a start. I was playing around with some different buildings, different shapes. I'd come up with this sort of triangular image that I really wanted to work into the rest of the piece, so I put a few more in. Kind of played around a little bit, threw some bridges in, maybe a little bit of water that I was seeing in some of these other pieces. Now once I got to this point, I'm like, okay, this isn't quite what I want it to be yet, but I think I am ready to start an actual piece, and I can just adapt it as I go along. So when I went to this image, I started by just mapping out my box, which is the 16:9, measuring it out, and I threw on a couple of foreground lines because those I knew I was sticking in the first place. Out of my images, I really enjoyed the sky, so I wanted to pull from that for the majority of my sky in this piece, so I started with that and the foreground elements. Given the light source in the sky coming from this side, I decided I want to have my main focal area and my big subject for the piece right about there, and have everything else kind of work out around it. The horizon for the piece I originally drew out perfectly straight, but then decided to slant ever so slightly just to give a little bit more dynamic to the piece. Next up, I went to my third image in the set, and I saw a lot of distant sort of background images that were more faded as you go to the back. For this reason, I was still unsure if I was going to use ink or graphite for the piece, and decided to go for graphite to get those very distant buildings and shapes in the background. Working towards the main element, but not quite there yet, I pulled some elements from the very background and started putting them a little bit closer. I also added these pipe structures, which I was working in my sketchbook about a month ago, and decided to bring those back for this piece. Then, modeling after that original set of images, I took a capsule and threw a few more elements in. There's that triangle element up here. played around with ideas of what do I want the landscape to look like. I decided to go with rocks for this piece versus oceans or grass, because I could hide some of the elements into the rocks and not have to worry about figuring out what the base of each item is going to look like. So when you're trying to build a new or interesting concept or environment, don't be afraid to grab a few references, and sometimes the more you have, the better, because you can just keep pulling from all these different elements. And if you think the idea of pulling from other artists' work is a little bit of a cheat, I'd suggest you go check out this video from PBS Offbook. It is a great explanation on creativity and how really the creative minds just kind of pull from other ideas and sort of remix them into something new. So I hope you found this video useful and somewhat enlightening, and as always, for more tips, tutorials, and other art videos, subscribe to the channel. This has been from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios. See you guys next time.